Hi, and welcome to the webinar on turning your book into an audiobook for Audible. I'm Dr. Kevin Gazzara, and I have Roni Brizzolara, I knew I was going to screw that up, with me. We're going to give you a little bit of intro to ourselves. So thanks for watching this. We hope this will be a very practical webinar for you to watch. The first thing that I always like to do whenever I do webinars is to talk about who this webinar is for. So if you are an author that's thought about actually putting your book on audio, then this is a good place to be. If you're an author that's thinking about writing a book and putting on audio, it's also a good place to be. And if you don't have a book or you don't ever plan on doing anything with audio, now's a great time to just go get a beverage and chill out. I thought we'd do some introductions first. We do have Roni on with us. Roni, why don't you tell us who you are and a little bit about your background, and then I'll do the same.
Okay. Well, I'm Roni Brizzolara. I live right outside of the Chicago area. I've been doing voiceover for 4 years, I think it is. You're my first audiobook, but I've done e-learning courses and internet commercials, national commercials, one, I should be honest, and just other like telephone messaging systems, that kind of thing. I studied at Chicago Acting Studio a few years ago, got some great training from them, and have had private coaching and all that. So I've been an active voiceover artist for those years and love it. It's been a lot of fun, and you can just go in your little studio and record.
I am Dr. Kevin Gazzara. I wrote a book with my colleague, Dr. Ali Lakhani, a little over 10 years ago, and we called it The Leader of Oz. And I will tell you, as an author and as a businessman, this has been probably the best thing that we had ever done to help build our business. So just a little bit of background for myself. Born and raised in Philadelphia area, got my undergraduate degree in engineering and business, then went off and did an MBA and did all my doctoral work in organizational leadership. I've worked for big companies, the last one being Intel, for about 18 years. And I was a product manager, I was a GM for them. I managed their management leadership development at Intel University for the last 10 years. And then I retired in 2007. I took two of my colleagues with me, Dr. Ali Lakhani and Marlene Lundy, and we started up a company called Magna Leadership Solutions. So it's been almost 15 years. And we've been doing management leadership development consulting. And one of the things that our colleagues told us that had been successfully consulting for many, many years, they said one of the things you really need is a book. You need a hardcover book that you can introduce yourself to with your philosophies in. And just handing that to a CEO or an executive is really a great, great tool to open doors for you. So that's why we wrote the book. They were absolutely right. It's probably one of the best things we had ever done. And we're actually on our third printing at the moment. One of the things that everyone has said, particularly over the past several years, is the frequency has gotten more and more. Is it available in audiobook? Can I listen to it? Because Audible and some of the other companies that do audiobooks have become so prevalent. So I decided in the beginning of the year that was one of my deliverables for this year. And we'll kind of talk you through the process of how that happened. So once again, thanks for joining us. Here's the agenda. Here's what we're going to try to accomplish for today, is tell you a little bit about how we got started with the process. For many of you, I don't know where you are in the process. If you're thinking about it, you're just thinking about it, you haven't thought about it, you thought this might be interesting to watch. I'll tell you how we started the process. Talk a little bit, Roni and I, about choosing your persona, where to find your voiceover artist. Roni's going to give you a kind of an insight scoop on that. Talk about auditions and how I did them and how you can experience doing those. And then I'll give you my perspectives of what to look for in a voiceover artist. I'm going to ask Roni to do the same thing as the expert here. And then we'll talk a little bit how I prepared for the project. It's a reasonable amount of work. If you follow a good process, you can get it done. And then we'll close with some pricing options just to give you an idea. It's more reasonable than you would think. And then how to make it happen. And Roni's going to share with you her best. So please stay here till the end. She's going to share her best resources of how to get started with the process. All right, so let's crank down the agenda. The book is on the right-hand side. I'm going to show you what it looks like after we get through the agenda in a moment. How we got started in the process. first thing I did is I went and talked to all the people I knew that had done audiobooks before, right? So I tapped into my resources, and they made lots of recommendations for me. And what they told me was, make sure that you get someone that's professional, that really has the kind of persona that you're looking for. And so we had a certain idea, particularly for Dora, who's the main character and the leader of Oz, what she sounded like, and we kind of had that, we're looking for a Judy Garland-ish type of voice. That was the first thing that we had done. We made a decision on male or female. Both myself and Dr. Lacani, who was my co-author, said, hey, we absolutely do not want to do this. We think our voices are not strong enough. And by the way, since the majority of the characters are female, we really felt a female character would be ideal. So I went out on the internet, I used some recommendations, and ultimately we found about 4 or 5 different voiceover artists. And what I did is I sent samples. I got 1 minute, 2 minute samples from all of them, and I sent this out to my colleagues. I said, vote on these. And the interesting thing was that of all the ones that we got, Roni was the one that every single one voted number 1 or 2 out of the 7s. So that was my point to go and negotiate with Roni. So Roni, anything that you would want to add to kind of give people an idea about how to start their process?
The beginning of my notes match up pretty much with what you just said. You want to decide the sound or the feel that you want. Like you're saying the persona, and you can go to many different sites to listen to voices, like I'm sure you did. I would just make sure that if you've written a book where you have characters in it like yours, make sure that voiceover artist is not just an announcer, that they can actually do some characters. Now, I don't consider myself an actress. I don't have acting chops necessarily, but I can do what a lot of audiobook readers do if they're not necessarily actors is, let's say I'm doing Dora Gale. I'm not going to talk here for Dora. I'm going to talk here for Dora. And if I'm doing a male voice, I'm going to drop it down a bit. I don't have to necessarily sound like a man, but for audiobook purposes, you want someone who's got a bit of a range, and definitely with inflection. Also, if like you shopped me out to 5 different people, and if all came back like, yes, that's the one, great, which means I passed a hurdle, which was, I'll give you an example. My friend of mine said, I was listening to an audiobook the other day and I couldn't finish it because the voice was so annoying. And so that's important too. Like if you like the voice, but other people say, it's kind of grating, I wouldn't go with that voice necessarily. I think you'll know when you find somebody, you'll be like, okay, that sounds good. He or she has got nice inflection, knows what they're doing, good pacing, all that kind of stuff.
Well, and you bring out a great point that one of the things that we didn't do that I probably should have done, and luckily, we were able to get you, was that we didn't ask the people for the different inflections. Although in the sample that we asked them to provide to us, it did have a couple characters in there. Some had inflections and some did not. I think one of the things that we determined is if you have multiple characters in there, having inflection without trying to be that other person really, I think, stands out. And if you go to Audible and you listen to our sample, there's a 5-minute sample that Roni had done for us that's right up front to kind of lead you in so you can listen to the first chapter. You'll hear the inflection, and she and I worked together to get an idea. She sent me a couple ideas of, do you want Dora a little higher pitch or a little lower pitch? And for the other characters, what to do. And the key to me was when you have multiple characters in a book, and some of you may not have characters, it might be just like a straight read of here's some leadership tips and so forth. You have a whole lot easier. If you do have some of those characters in the book, that ability to have just enough inflection, so when you're listening to it, you're not saying, God, was that Dora, or was that Howard, or was that, right? So just having just enough makes it very, very listenable.
Yeah, have them have the voiceover do a sample read for you from your book, like you did. Pick a spot where there's going to be a lot of different characters in it, and just listen to 2 minutes of that, and you'll know.
Yeah, exactly. And
they can't.
When we sent it out to our colleagues, they picked up on that right away. So we talked about kind of starting the process. I think one of the other tips I'll give you is that just handing the book over physically or electronically to the voiceover artist, sometimes you have to think about things that are a little bit different, right? In the book, you don't want to talk about reading the book, right? It's you have to say about listening to the book. one of the things that we did was we made sure that the voiceover artist had enough information. She was doing an audiobook, not just doing it as a reading book, right? So there's some little nuances that you have to have there. So that's another tip to pay attention to.
I have one more tip when it comes to the beginning of the process. I think I sent this over to you. You were really organized. You had all your ducks in a row. There were just a couple things you needed to get to me, like web address and stuff like that, but that's fine. I can't tell you how many jobs I get when people say, okay, can you just record this for me real quick? And I record it and they come back with, oh, the client wants to change this, or the client made a mistake in the script. And all those revisions can cost money. They should cost money.
Yes.
Especially for an audiobook. Make sure your script is done. Your text is completely finalized with just a couple maybe minor suggestions or addition. Have your act together before you hire someone.
Being a relatively organized person, that was easy for me to run through, although we did have a little bit of a hiccup at the end when we put it on Audible. One of the things that we found from Audible, and by the way, Audible was very, very easy to do. There are some people that you can hire to put up all the files and so forth. It's really pretty straightforward. If you don't want to do that, you can go hire someone on any one of the sources that Roni's going to give us, not only for voiceover, but also to be able to move it to the audio platform. But the ACX platform, which is the Audible platform, is really quite friendly to use. The one thing that we did find out at the last minute was, unless you have 100% of the files ready to upload, it won't let you do that. They wanted a separate intro. They wanted separate credits, I think. There was a few things in that we hadn't planned on. One recommendation would be is listen to a sample audiobook that's on Audible, and you'll be able to hear and see the different chapters that they have. So you don't have to go back. So we were all set to publish it, and it was like, oh, we're missing 2 files.
We had a technical glitch too, which surprised me. On acx.com, it has all of the audio standards and requirements that you need for the decibels and all that, sound levels and everything. And we submitted every single file according to those standards. But when you first submitted your first couple chapters, they got kicked back because they said, no, it needs to be at negative 23 decibels or whatever for sound value. And on ACX, it says, oh, you can have it between negative 18 and negative 23 decibels for sound value. We found that's really not the case. So we went back and made every single file negative 23 so they would accept it. So that was kind of a weird little glitch that we tripped on, but we got it.
Right. I don't think it was our challenge. It was what was modify some of the standards, and they probably didn't get it posted on time. You bring up a really good point, though, here, Roni, for people listening is, can you do all of this yourself? Right? Particularly if you have a really strong voice, the answer is yes. Having an audio engineer like Roni has, and I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about your engineer and how they do that. Having that ability to be able to do any of the modifications, the edits, the noise reduction, the decibel levels, the formats, all of that. If you're not a techno weenie like I am, having someone and making sure your voiceover artist, if it's you or if it's someone else, has that accessibility, I think will be invaluable to you.
Here's what I can say about that. If you find a voice you like, here's what I would really recommend. Go to their website, go to the voiceover's website, not just on ACX and all that, not just their profile. Listen not only to their commercial and narration demos, because those are professionally made, and maybe it's somebody else's studio, like mine are. We're made at a different studio by a different audio guy. I mean, I paid for that. But listen to the voiceover's other samples of the things they produced from their studio, either with their audio guy or by themselves. A lot of us do it ourselves. Because it was an audiobook, I had someone else help me out. But listen to the other audio. Like if you look at me and I've got a sample of e-learning courses and a medical text or something like that, those are things that I recorded in my home studio. And so you're going to hear the audio quality that I can produce for you. If you do that and you're listening to somebody and their demos sound fantastic, but their samples of things that they produced have background noise or mouth noises or what's called artifacts, they need little glips and clicks, whatever in the background, that's the quality you're going to get because that's what they can produce. So be very careful about that. Like if you have them do an audition, likely that audition will be done from their home studio. So listen not just to how they read and speak, listen to the background. crackling? Is there any background noise? Can you hear a car horn in the background? Just stuff like that. Listen for those things as well. Like listen through it twice maybe. First time for the artist, second time for the background or the audio quality. So that's, not everybody would think of that. Don't just listen to their professional demos. Listen to the samples of work they have.
Good tips there. And I think that one of the other things is, as you're looking for the different artists, first of all, the thing that I found, which was somewhat overwhelming, is you can go to acx.com. Amazon owns that, and essentially that is the arm that produces all of the Audible books for them. And there's lots and lots of options for hiring the voiceover artists. Many of them will have voices in there already. I would say most have that. So you can listen to them and you can put a project out. One of the things I'll tell you to be careful of is if you put the project out there, particularly if you just open it up, I found that I got deluged with voices, right? So the more explicit you can be in the project of what you were looking for, the better. So I made sure that there was enough description in there, so hopefully the artist that was going to apply really fit the bill. But I will tell you, even though it said female Judy Garland type for this type of thing, having the ability to do character inflections, I will tell you, I probably got about 20% of older male guys that were from Britain, right, kind of thing, right? That I'm going to get all these other voices that have no idea. So just be ready for that. So the more explicit that you can be, and I probably should have been a little bit stronger. Like, if you don't fit these, please do not contact me. My inbox just went absolutely crazy. You have another person that's ready for auditioning. Any other tips, Roni, for that?
I think that's basically it. Just make sure that they can do character voices, make sure they've got good audio quality. I mean, you don't need to know about, what kind of microphone do you have and what kind of interface are you using? I mean, you guys don't need to know that, we do. But it all has to do with what does it sound like? So I would go with your gut. I mean, you guys heard me and thought, okay, that's the one.
Right.
And, Dr. Bryant, if you do the same kind of thing, you're probably going to have a similar experience where it's like, okay, yeah, these 2 or 3 people are who could probably do it for me. So at the beginning of the phase, I would just, have your text ready to go, listen carefully to people.
I'm actually going to bounce ahead a couple slides. And I wanted to talk about let's jump to the sources, Roni, that you had recommended. And then I'll tell you about the sources that I used in my experiences with all of them.
Okay. The top of my list was what you've already said. acx.com actually matches authors to voiceover people. It's a middleman, and it's a really pretty good system for matching people. But like you said, you can get deluged if you're not careful. But acx.com, there's another audiobook company that I'm on the roster of, Dayan Audio, yanaudio.com. There are also pay-to-play places like voices.com and voice123.com. are both places that little old me can spend hundreds of dollars a year to have the privilege of auditioning for people. But it does kind of screen out the good from the not so good, possibly. So people who are more established are probably going to be on those sites as well. There's also like freelancer sites, Mandy.com, Fiverr.com, and Upwork, which is where you found me.
Right.
And the other thing, if you're looking for the pay, we'll talk about the pay in a minute, but if you can pay anywhere from a couple $100 to thousands, it just kind of depends. There's no set pricing for this necessarily, but if you really want upper echelon talent, then go to a talent agency. And in Chicago, doesn't matter where you are because everything is digital these days. Like Kevin and I have never been on the same state at the same time, so it's all just emailed back and forth with MP3 files and everything. A few of the top agencies in Chicago are Jackman Gross, Stewart Talent, and I'm with Stavens Talent. Those are pre-screened. You can't just get a talent scout or a talent agent. You have to warrant it. You have to pay some dues and be good enough to be on their rosters. So those are, 8 or 10 different possible sources. On things like Mandy and Fiverr and Upwork, you're going to find a gamut. I'm kind of surprised Kevin found me there. I'm surprised you were looking on Upwork. Surprised you didn't just go straight with ACX, which I'm on as well. But
I'll let you finish, then I'll give everybody the insight of the sites that I've used and why I used them. Okay, anything additional that you want to share?
In terms of sources, that's plenty. You're going to find somebody through any of those. Okay, and there are many, many, many other talent agents, not just those 3 in Chicago. They're all over the place. So, you can just do a basic Google search. But if you're looking for the top ones, then, those three are great. In Chicago, I'm sure Arizona and California and New York, everybody's got top talent agencies. So, but you're going to pay more, most likely, because there's more of a middleman and all that. But you're not going to find a Morgan Freeman or a Sigourney Weaver necessarily in any of these places, but you'll find some good talent and some very good talent. I think that's it in terms of sourcing that I have. I don't want to overwhelm your listeners necessarily.
Let me tell the listeners about the approach that I used and the different sources. I initially started with acx.com. I think, as Roni had said, great source, probably the easiest, all integrated and so forth. I use Upwork for other projects. I'm very familiar with Upwork, and generally it has good quality talent. So whether it's for writing or doing animations, I use it quite a bit for doing heavy-duty translations. Our leadership program, we deliver in lots of different countries, and when we deliver them, I just had one done it for Japan, one done for China, one done for in Amsterdam and Dutch. I found that the Upwork fits that need in particular. So since I was familiar with that, had an account with that, and had good luck with it, I decided why not try to use it for a voiceover. And that's where, fortunately, as fate would have it, that I found Roni. I've also used Fiverr for very small, less quality. It's not that you can't get good quality there. For those of you who are not familiar with Fiverr, it is a source that essentially you can buy anything for $5 as a baseline. And I was not expecting getting a voiceover artist to do that. The one thing I will tell you is I've gotten some good voiceover artists when we've had a quick video that we've produced for a minute or two, and I just need a minute or two. Sometimes they will do character actors, like they will do impersonations. We had one of our videos we had someone do James Earl Jones. You can get a 1 minute video done for 10 or 20 bucks. So I didn't go to Fiverr any of these activities, but I did look at mostly ACX and Upwork. I didn't try the other ones. I wasn't even aware of those until, Roni, you sent these to me this week. What you're going to find is there's way more talent out there and you don't really have to search. You just have to spend the time to do the listen. And the one thing I really tried to do was people were courteous enough to apply that I at least told them whether we were going to use them or not, right? So I think that's important.
I would also add, Kevin, real quick, if you find a voiceover you like, make sure that they have their own website as well, their own voiceover website, because if they don't, it's kind of odd that they wouldn't have their own website. And hopefully on their website, they're going to have a lot more samples of what they've done, what they can do, that kind of testimonials.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Back to the agenda to see what we've covered. So how to get started, how to choose the persona, talked about that, where to find it, which we just did. The auditions, they will send them to you. Listen to them. If you have a group of people that you work with, since I spent 18 years at Intel, I have a vast network. In fact, we have a group that we get together once a month called the Ex-Intel Facilitator Consortium that I've been running for almost 3 years now. And there's about 18 of us that are all doing the same kind of thing, that we're doing consulting or teaching or leadership development. And many of us have books, some do not, and we get together to share best known methods. So I have both male, female there. I also have people from around the world. So we sent this also to people in Europe and in Asia to listen to not only make sure that we got some input from them. If they were a non-English speaker, we wanted to make sure that the voice was pleasant for them and clear enough so that they could do that. So if you'd like to get this so it's more universally available without being translated, you might want to do that. And us having those different people in the mix, so we had a diversity of background, was very important to us as far as how we hired the voiceover artist. And then the last thing I'll tell you about hiring the voiceover artist is, we started out with a whole bucket of, 30 people that had applied. And I'd say of the 30, there are probably 15 that could be considered. And what we did was we got it down to about 5, and then we got it down to 2. And really, Roni was the clear winner. So I didn't even go to the second person. She wasn't a close second. I sent Roni, I said, okay, we've decided. All of this happened over about a 2 or 3 week period. And I sent her the note, and about an hour before our call, I got an email from Roni, and the email said, thanks, but no thanks.
Right.
So being the salesperson that I am, she was professional enough to say, I don't want to commit to something that I don't have the bandwidth. And I was really looking for, I think originally we were looking to get things done in 2 or 3 weeks. And that was a goal. Once again, this is a preset goal. One of the things I will tell everyone listening here is that deadlines almost 100% of the time are arbitrary, particularly if they're set by the client, having that flexibility. So Roni sent me this note. She was very professional and said, hey, if you'd still like to talk, I'm still available. I just want to let you know during the time that we've been talking that my schedule has really filled up quite a bit, and meeting your schedule may be in jeopardy. I don't want to put you in that position. So we had a call. I had way more flexibility than what she had originally thought, because once again, we're just trying to set the boundaries. We negotiated and said, hey, how can you using this to fill the gaps in the time that you have, so that it's a benefit to her, it's a benefit to me. And I think, Roni, you had said to me, being able to get a book on Audible so that you could use it as a promo would be an advantage to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you said, it's the author is not in a major hurry to get it done within 3 or 4 weeks or 2 weeks or something. It worked out great that you had time. And I said, okay, here's what I can do. Because I was feeling a little overwhelmed with how much work I was getting at that very moment. It was kind of crazy. And I said, okay, I can do a few chapters for you a week. Can we spread it out over 8 weeks? Are you cool with that? And you were. It's like, okay, great. That made a really good pace for that period of time.
The way we set up the contract, which has always worked for me when I've worked with the other sources like Upwork and Fiverr and so forth, is I always like to do based around deliverables rather than time. I think we had 21 chapters and we split it up over 8 weeks of like 2 or 3 chapters a week. And then we just wrote the contract, which using Upwork was super easy, right? You just say, here are the deliverables, and for each one of the deliverables for the contract price, here's what you get, and you just cut the contract price by 8, and that's what we had, right? And that worked really well for me. I know some people do it on a time basis, like 1/3 up front, 1/3 in the middle. The challenge is if you don't tie it to deliverables, those hard deliverables, the chapters, the files, that sometimes you can get into some problems, whether it's this kind of work or any other kind of work.
And I'll say right there also, make darn sure, first of all, that you're a voiceover person and that they are reliable. Because what would have happened to you if, say, 11 chapters into it, I flaked out, which some artists can do, and said, hey, I can't finish this for you, so sorry. You've just spent, that would kill me on Upwork and my ratings and all that. You would have just spent all that time. You would have to start all over again. Because what are you going to do? Have somebody else finish the next chapters? Doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing that we were determining as we looked at the different artists. And by the way, we're going to get into pricing options here in a minute, is that the artists were all over the place. We had one artist quoted us to do the book. I think the end hours of it was just right around 3 hours total for our book, because it's relatively short. We had one artist that actually made it into the top 7 for $100. She said, I'll do the whole thing for $100. We thought, whoa, that's crazy. And she said, yeah, I've never done voiceover before. I want to get into this. I'm a nurse. I want to do this. I think I have a good voice. People have told me that. I have never done an audiobook. So we decided, no, I think, even though the price is attractive, it's much more important to be able to get, as Roni said, a good product that we know that is going to be delivered, and we're not going to have to go through lots and lots of iterations. So I wished her luck, and then we kind of moved on. Now, on the one end of the scale was $100. On the other end of the scale, people that didn't make it into the final 7 was about $3,000. So they won essentially $1,000 per hour of a finished book, right? So good voice. I would put Roni's voice up against the $1,000 voice at any time. And that's just kind of the way it worked out. I think everything is relatively negotiable. My belief is you always want to make sure that it's a win-win for both parties. And, the variables you can work with, are pricing, delivery time, number of revisions, all of those. As long as you can keep it down where it's workable for the artist and yourself, generally, hopefully you'll get a good result. Roni, why don't you talk a little bit about pricing so everybody knows what you'd recommend?
Like you said, it's all over the place. Now, I'm sure she would have done the whole thing for you for $100. Well, but, just well, what's her audio quality? You know what I mean? Does she know how to edit that much material, that kind of thing? I would say, now there is no going rate, but for audiobooks, and I just double checked this on ACX to make sure I knew what I was talking about. For the most part, you can get a good voiceover who will do the book for you for $200 to $400 per finished hour. So if your book is 3 hours, that would be, multiplied by 3. You can certainly pay less than that. You can pay more than that. It just depends on what kind of top quality you really need. Like a friend of mine just did an audiobook. It was 9 hours long. It ended up being 9 hours. And she got $3,000 for it. She's a seasoned SAG-AFTRA Chicago actress. She's been on TV and in movies and everything. And she did this and got $3,000, but it was a lot of recording. She also farmed out all of the editing because that's a tremendous amount of editing to do, which, by the way, is really what you're paying for. I mean, you're paying for a good voice, but also it might take me 6 hours or 12 hours to get it all recorded. But it's the editing is like 3 times as long. Taking out all those breaths, doing all the background noise, everything, making the pacing right and all that. But basically, I would say, like with ACX, there are more artists on there who are offering $200 to $400 per finished hour than the other price ranges. So I think it's pretty safe to say that. So if you got a 3-hour book, you expect to spend $600 to $1,200 for that book for an artist who will get it all completely edited for you.
I think that's fair. And
I should say, I'm sorry, there's another way too. On ACX, you can also do like that. You can get a flat rate like that, or the artist can also say, well, I'll agree to do a royalty share with you. So you kind of split the profits over time. And I haven't done that, but ACX explains all those parameters and all that. So that's a possibility as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I decided not to do that either. I just wanted to pay the artist, and it's not so much that I wanted the royalties. It's taking a gamble, right? That I don't know how many books are going to sell. You don't know how many books are going to sell. You're talking about the 200 to 400 range. For me to get full-blown audiobook, essentially that looks like this on Audible is price well paid. The way we look at it is if I get one executive that listens to this and they really like the book, they're going to hire us for our leadership program. We have something called the Leading Forward Academy, right? It's a 6-month program. It's relatively expensive and it's primarily targeted at corporations. So if I can get one person interested, I can get a 10-fold, 100-fold return on my investment.
Right. And the other thing is, if you're a higher rated author on Audible, then royalty share would make sense. Like I can look at you as an author and say, well, he's in the top 200 authors or something like that. His books sell. So I'm going to go for royalty share.
Sure.
Stuff like that. That can be how it works as well.
That's also a really good way to look at it. I think we've covered a good portion of what we wanted to talk about. I think one other thing, and I'm going to just open it up for questions, if Dr. Brian has questions or not. One of the things that we got recommendations for when we launched I have another book that I co-authored with Rita Creasy-Reed called Ready, Set, Get Hired. So that's on the to-do list to get it in Audible. We wrote it during the pandemic for people that were out of work, or whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, or they wanted to make a decision. We wanted to do something differently. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to give them a method that I had developed. And Rita was actually one of my master's students, graduates from ASU. I taught at a bunch of universities, ASU being one of those. She got downsized, so I said, hey, I'll show you the process I use with the goal that if you write the book at the end, and I'll help you write it, I'll co-author it with you. She did most of the work. I'll give her the credit. So it says by Rita Creasy-Reed, with Kevin Gazzara. So I wanted to make sure she got the proper credit. One of the things that we recognized is that you really need ratings, right? You need to get reviews. So that's the other thing. If you have a book, is make sure you have enough reviews. We've got 25 reviews. They're all 4 and 5 star, which is nice, from a variety of people. I'd say 90% of them are all verified, so they're real reviews. They're not purchase reviews. We don't recommend buying purchase reviews. And the nice thing that happens with Audible is when you have reviews of your book, as you can see, they show up as reviews of the content. It's not a review of the audiobook. The ratings do come over from the book, which was a nice thing that we didn't recognize. So our next step is to try to get reviews of the audiobook itself. These are reviews primarily of the book content. We've been doing a lot of talking for the last 50 minutes. Dr. Brian, you were so good to join us with this webinar. For your book, what questions didn't we answer that might be useful to the listeners?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. You guys shared quite a bit of useful information. 2 questions. One, it relates to how different is the literature from the book itself versus the audio. So I'm curious to know if there was much change in when you, because I know you said that you were very prepared. You didn't have a whole lot of changes. I heard that, you know, the person that did the voiceover was able to, you know, fall into that role pretty easily because you guys were well prepared and had everything together. But the actual literature itself, and I've read the Leader of Oz, and I'm curious to know how much different it is from the Audible itself. Or did she literally kind of just verbatim? I'm curious.
When we pulled the Word file out, right, what we did is we changed very, very little to the actual wording. The difference is when we wrote the book originally, we hadn't thought about it from a perspective of audio. So there were things like go to this page and read this. Well, there isn't a page number there. Or fill this in on this. Or at the end of each chapter, check this. Or as you're reading, you know, we had to change it to as you're listening, right? Types of things. So we wanted to make it feel like an audio book. And the other thing that we recognized is because the book that we have, Aaron, is interactive to a degree that at the end of each chapter, there are what we call, the book is 101 Secrets of Marvelous Leadership. At the end of each chapter, there's something for you to fill in, which essentially is kind of a summary of the chapter. Do you do this? And at the end of the book, it gives you a chart that you fill it in, and it tells you, do you lead more like Dorothy or the Cowardly Lion or the Tin Man or the Scarecrow? So that's part of the book as you're reading it. In an audio environment, you don't have that. We had to essentially extract those elements. And when you buy the book, the first thing up front, it says there is a workbook that goes along with this. You know, here's where you have to go to download the workbook. That was Roni was talking about, adding the additional websites and so forth. And we recognized that had to be done. And you know, I went to my webmaster and said, hey, you need to create a permanent website so when people order the book that they can go and download it. One of the tips is that if you do that, in order for them to get the book or them to get the workbook, they have to leave their email address. So this gives us an idea, not only because Amazon sends you you can look at it daily, you can see how many books you're selling. It does not tell you who is buying them. So the first thing we know is they're buying them, are they listening to them? Because then we're getting the request for the workbook. And 2, it gives us the ability to follow through. So we had to add that element and that link so that we could help track. Roni, anything additional?
Yeah, just an answer to Dr. Bryant's question was, as far as I knew, I was reading an adapted version of the book word for word, as far as I knew. You know, I mean, I never read the book itself. But yeah, you had all those changes in it for listening as opposed to reading, that kind of thing. And so I knew that you were doing your homework in adapting for audiobook.
It can't say, go to page 143 on the chart on 143. You have to say, go to the Leader of Oz workbook chart. And I don't think we even put page numbers. We just called it a workbook chart or the leader chart, whatever it was.
Good. Yeah, I remember reading The Leader of Oz, and it was fairly soon after I had Dr. Ali as a teacher, and I felt like he was giving me more work to do. So I remember those assignments and those after every chapter little summaries. My other question, this is probably more so for Roni. I noticed that, and my book was published on Amazon as well. And that's why I'm here now looking at the Audible portion of it. And I noticed that the Audible is tied into Amazon, but like I am a very active audiobook listener and I use Libby and I used to use Overdrive. Is there a relationship with each of these particular audio platforms as it relates to Amazon itself, which is obviously the more popular one? Or, I mean, do they have some sort of contractual relationship, or can you for instance, use the Amazon one and then they will just share it with all the others?
I can answer that for you. So when you sign up, you have the option to be able to choose whether you want to have it exclusively on Amazon, which I think they give you like double or triple the kind of the royalty, or you can have it so that you can distribute it to the other platforms. For this book, I decided just to go to Amazon. That's the biggest one for Audible. I think there were some additional incentives to do that, not necessarily monetary, more so with regard to how it was promoted and so forth. I don't know whether that was the best choice or not, so I'll be really transparent with everyone. My goal specific was to be able to get it in the most prominent place, and I think Audible is the most prominent place to do that. And I want to do everything possible that I could get that additional kind of viewership of it, right? I believe that I have the ability to change that in the future, may opt to change it. Another source that I listen to is one called Chirp. I don't know if you listen to that, Aaron, or not. That's another one. I think it's author preference, and Amazon does give you enough latitude to make that determination. I don't think you have to have an exclusive, although I think they make it pretty attractive to keep the exclusive. All right, Aaron, anything additional?
No, I think this is great. Thank you.
Sure, our pleasure. So this is what the final product kind of looked like. These are the sources that we shared with you earlier. And anybody that's watching this video, if you'd like copies of these, just send them an email to myself. And this is a way for anyone to connect with us. So you can connect with me at kevin@magnaleadership.com. And there's Roni's email below. If you want, I'm always delighted to help other authors or other consultants with anything that can help build their business. Roni, I'll let you speak for yourself of how available you are.
I, in general, am still available to do audiobooks and more work. It's kind of a steady stream at this point. So if people are interested, by all means, shoot me an email and we'll chat about it and see what your project is and what the capabilities are. I'm certainly open to talking to people about what they got going on. So by all means, I welcome emails from your listener.
Roni's kind of cut her teeth on the Leader of Oz book with us, right? So she knows all the ins and outs and the decibel levels and so forth. So we've grown together there. I do have to say she was such a delight to work with. Very, very flexible, took direction really well, when we were adjusting cadence and so forth. I think the nice thing, right, Roni, that kind of is an inside tip is that as we adjusted the cadence, with kind of words per minute to kind of get it to where it was easily listenable as opposed to rapid fire. You have that ability, I think, as a voiceover artist to be able to say to the engineer, hey, we need to drop this down to 100 words per second instead of or per minute rather than the 110 that I'm running at. In the past, when we're dealing with analog and not digital, right, you would have to do a complete re-record. And with your audio engineer, I could say, yeah, it's just a hair too fast. Can we drop it to 100 instead of 110?
Yeah, and that was an easy fix. Like, sure, we got it.
That's one of the beauties of digital recording. That I'm a musician, and in the past, going in and doing analog tape and retakes and speeding things up and slowing it down was a nightmare. Now that everything is digital, it's just a push of a button and you've got 100 versus 110. Well, I see we're at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. I hope that you find it useful. I will give you the links if you want to share this with anyone. Please do so. Please contact us if you have an interest in anything with regard to writing a book, moving a book to audio, anything with regard to leadership management, team development, and so forth. I'd love to talk to you about that. Roni, any closing words?
It was an absolute pleasure working with you also, Kevin, and you were very organized and you knew exactly what you wanted, which helps us so much when the client has their acts together and knows what they want. And I don't mean to scare anybody off. I mean, you don't have to, be perfect. We did have some glitches and changes, but not a whole lot. It was such a pleasure doing it for you that we could just crank it out at a nice, easy pace and get it all done. So it was an absolute pleasure. And, I invite anybody to get your audiobook published, get it read, get it voiced. Just do it. So but thank you, Kevin. It was really, really nice working with you.
Thanks for joining us, Roni. And Dr. Bryant, thank you so much for having questions for us and interest. I hope that you can get your book done as well. All right. Bye now. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
All right.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.